Welcome everyone. If you're here to talk about open finance and the future of open finance in New Zealand. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining this session. My name is Josh. I'm from the team at Akahu. We're an open finance intermediary, so we spend all of our days thinking about the future of open finance in New Zealand. And I'm really excited with the panelists that we've got today to weigh in on this topic because we've got a lot of different perspectives here and a lot of experience. So as we were preparing for this panel, we decided to put up our objectives because I think panels can often weave their way around and not give a really coherent picture of the topic. So we decided to share these objectives with you. So by the end of the session, we want you to leave knowing what open finance is, if you don't already. We want you to be able to describe some examples of open finance that exist already in New Zealand. We want to make sure that you have some ideas around how open finance may affect your business. So to that end, we wanted to get an understanding of who is here. So can I just see a show of hands of who is here that's in insurance? Not many. And who is here that provides financial advice? Who is here that is a consultant of some type? What else have we got? Who is here from the banking industry? And who hasn't put their hand up already? Oh, you. There's a whole lot. Okay, well, if we don't touch on your particular sector and we don't fulfill number 3 here, please yell out or send the Q&A and we will address that during the Q&A session. And lastly, we want to talk about some insights about what's happening at the vanguard of open finance in New Zealand because it is developing quickly. And there are some hot topics that have not yet been decided. So this is what we aim to achieve in our time today. There will be time for Q&A at the end, so please use the function on the app if you haven't already. And now it's time to meet the panelists. So can we start by giving a brief introduction and maybe give a perspective on how you know about open finance and what your part is in it. So if we start with you, Danielle.
Thank you. Hello everybody, that's working, that's great. Hello, I manage the Australia-New Zealand Partnerships Financial Services for Xero. Before that I was in banking for a really long time, payments and transactional banking, particularly for government and for financial institutions and for banks. Also was a consultant. Hello consultants in the room. Good to see you taking time out of your very busy schedules to come here today. And before I was working at Xero, I was starting a Masters in Public Policy, which is coming extremely handy in open finance. So Xero is a long-time user and supporter of open finance, although we don't tend to use that language around it. So we take feeds in from banks for data and we share data with over 1,000 ecosystem apps, which is really an open data or an open finance or an open banking type of a concept.
That's awesome. Thank you, Danielle. Caroline.
Hi, my name is Caroline Carver. I'm a principal consultant in privacy for Mosaic FSI. So I'm one of those consultants. And my role predominantly is working with banks, SaaS providers, service intermediaries to make sure the privacy of any of this data sharing we're doing through open finance is safe and in compliance with the Privacy Act. As well as working with those of you who are wanting overseas legislation such as GDPR and making sure that your journey to get to that is as smooth as possible.
Thank you. Adrian.
You need to.
E ngā mana, e ngā waka, e ngā reo, e rauranga tirama, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko pitai te maunga, ko waroro te awa, ko ngā toki mata whaoroa te waka, ko ngāpui tuku iwi, ko te ure o hua tuku hāpū, no tipi ake au ki Hamilton. Let's see. Ko Stephen and Smith Rowa ko I moi komene, o ku matua, ko Adrian tōku ingoa. And then, so hi, my name's Adrian. I am the Chief Product Officer of the Māori fintech called BlinkPay. We're a SaaS company. We're doing payments technology at the moment within New Zealand, connecting to open banking data rail, open banking rails. Just by way of background, I've spent my entire academic and working career since 1995 chasing all things digital and technology. It's all I know. I'm monoline. And so I've just returned from 15 years in the UK, doing big bank transformation. I rebuilt 4 of the British banks. And I'm here because we're pretty enthusiastic about all things open banking, open finance, open data. So, kia ora.
Thank you. And Jannat.
Hello, everybody. Firstly, thank you for the opportunity, and to FinTech NZ, Jason, and nice to have you all in the room today, and thank you for choosing this session over all the other ones. This will be the most fun one, I believe. My name is Jannat Mcboole. I, similar to Adrian, have spent quite a while in the tech and finance space, but took a bit of a break for a little while. I was doing FinTech before most of you actually knew even what it was. And who remembers the Y2K bug? Yep, I was testing for the Y2K bug for ING Bank in Australia. Spent a bit of time in academia, and I'm not an academic though. Apparently I am. That's what people are talking about me as, and I'm not, as I've clarified. But I did do a master's in digital business focused on fintech, and then that got me an opportunity that I'm really appreciative of, thanks to James Brown, who's just walked in, to actually lead the report around open finance and the opportunity for New Zealand and making it about Aotearoa New Zealand. And so I'm here from that perspective to share some insights from the report, which is available at the FinTech NZ website, and I'm sure you would want to read it after this panel because we're going to touch on a number of areas of it. And yeah, really looking forward to the discussion.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. So now we get into the proper content, and we wanted to start with what is open finance. And I'm sure a lot of people in this room know a lot about it or some about it, but we want to make sure for people that are new to it, we cover off what it is and give some examples. So if we start with you, Danielle, I mean, Xero is a giant in New Zealand, and it has really pioneered the use of connected accounts. Can you talk to us about what open finance is?
Yeah, thank you. I feel ill-equipped to speak on this compared to some of the others on the panel, but I'll talk briefly about open data, or OpenX, as it sometimes seems to be in the zeitgeist now, OpenX, open finance and open banking. Open banking is kind of the simplest one. We'll start there, I think. So that's basically banks create APIs. They then enable their customers to share their banking data with some third party to do some service for them. So key to that, and key to all of open everything, is that the customer owns their data, and they will make a choice about where they send it to. Open finance is like open banking plus more, so it's open banking plus insurance data, plus fund data, plus wealth management data, plus buy now, pay later, plus whatever. So that enables a customer, an individual or a business to have a full and holistic picture of their financial position at any one time. And then there's open data. So open data is basically open anything. So we talk about, banks can open APIs, but so can energy companies, so can telecommunications companies, so can everybody. At Xero, we take bank feeds under an open banking type of a concept, but we provide accounting data, which is not covered in open banking or open finance. Really, it's open data to provide services for customers. So yeah, Josh, we've done this for a really long time. It's foundational to what we do. Getting these raw data feeds creates the opportunity for our customers to do their key accounting activity, which is a bank reconciliation, to create the counts. So our customers have got more time, if there are plumbers, to plumb, if there are electricians, to electric, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really core to what we do.
Thank you. And you mentioned the app ecosystem at Xero, and there are so many applications that are built in this huge wake that Xero has created, this massive opportunity by sharing that accounting data. Can you maybe mention one or two of those apps and how they use the Xero data to go and add more value back to SMEs?
Yeah, okay, sure. So, BlinkPay is one that is integrated with us, I think very, very recently. Congratulations. Another that we're really proud of and has recently been announced, which is a New Zealand company, is Kogo, which is now live in Australia and integrated with Xero data. So that one, the data that comes into Xero, which originates as bank feeds, turns into accounting data. And then that categorised information can go into Kogo, and then they can assess the carbon footprint of those transactions, can give that business a sense then of if its carbon footprint, and then they provide advice to that business on how to reduce that. It also provides an opportunity for that business to share its carbon footprint because, as we've seen, fascinating today how much carbon talk there's been. Customers choose businesses based on things like that. I chose to work at Xero partly because it's carbon neutral. neutral. So an opportunity to prove that you're doing well in that area is something that COGO can do, both appealing to customers and also to staff. Just to go back to BlinkPay though, and Worldline's another one. I mean, the payment apps are interesting in New Zealand because in contrast to Australia, where I'm from, we don't have any open banking sort of payment mechanisms. Ours is all very government run or industry run, but mandated infrastructure. So the fact that New Zealand has built systems organically is quite fascinating. And so there's a few apps that are rising out of that. And one thing we didn't cover, Josh, and maybe we'll get to it later, is where the government role is in all of this.
Yep, awesome, thank you. So let's carry on from that and go to you, Adrian. I think everyone in New Zealand is familiar with Xero and the immense popularity of connecting your financial accounts into Xero, how much better that makes your life if you're doing bookkeeping or accounting. Do you want to maybe talk about the more recent wave of fintech or apps that use connected accounts? And maybe talk more about BlinkPay and what you've seen in New Zealand and other parts of the world?
Yeah, absolutely, Josh. So, as I said earlier, I've spent quite a number of years in the UK doing a lot of stuff at the bleeding edge of technology, and the UK has quite a progressive regulatory system that sort of drive forward a lot of that activity, which has been interesting because if banks welch on their commitments, then the regulator holds them to account in a way that I'm not sure is equivalent in New Zealand. But in my time in the UK, I came across this incredible smart money app called Plum. And I don't know if anyone's seen Plum, but it's the quintessential open finance platform in the UK market based on what's there today. So what happens is you create a connection or a relationship with the app itself, the platform, so you sign up your credentials, and as part of the onboarding, you actually connect via open banking rails your bank accounts. So that then brings in the account information, the balances, and the transactions. And what they do very cleverly is, as the transactions are coming into, they're running algorithms on the background, calculating ways that you could potentially save money to be better off. And so they've recently opened that up for cards as well. So you've got both your main account data from banking accounts, as well as card data. Now, if you think about it, in New Zealand, there was 153 million card transactions in July alone. Imagine what could be created off the back of that level of data. What they then do is, once they've created all these really clever algorithms, they'll say, oh, by the way, Jannat, did you know that you could save a couple of bucks here every month without even thinking about it? Would you like to do so? And then you have a very binary yes or no option, and then they sweep that money from the account into a savings pot. And very quickly, people who had hundreds of thousands of customers, at least when I was in the UK, who'd never saved a penny in their lives, suddenly had savings pots. Now, what did they logically do with all that money in saving pots? They said, well, actually, we're going to create investment capabilities so you can then invest those saving pots into investment accounts to create wealth. That's logical, that makes sense. What they also did as an open finance capability, though, is they then created, well, they use in the UK this thing called SIPs, or self-invested personalised pensions, where you could bring together all of your pensions into a pension wrapper, and then you can then determine what you do with your pensions. The UK are very mad for pensions. It's their version of KiwiSaver. Like when I was in the UK, I had a Lloyd's pension, I had a Barclays pension, and a government pension I didn't even know existed. And so the ability to bring those all into one space, so if you wish to, you can actively manage your pensions in one space, that makes a lot of sense to me. And so that's the kind of capabilities that can be done with open finance if you've got a platform that's capable to ingest that data and you've got willing participants.
Awesome. And we did promise to cover off some examples of how open finance may affect some of the industries that are represented in the room. We can get to this later on, but is there anything that comes to mind in insurance or banking or financial advice that you'd want to mention now from your travels around the world?
One of the things that the UK was very quick on was the aggregation market, the ability to actually bring all those products into a place where they could be meaningfully compared. The insurer market in the UK was pretty mad. And one of the challenges that we discovered when I was at Lloyd's was the ability to meaningfully compare insurance products is difficult, right? There's so much parameterization. I just used a 7-syllable word. There's so much parameterization you have to think about when you're configuring insurance products, policies and coverages that it's really hard to compare against. You know, if anyone in the insurance industry disagrees, by all means let me know, but we found that awfully difficult. But with the Halifax and Bank of Scotland capability, we built a whole bunch of internal APIs that allow us to do things very quickly. So when it came to externalise them, it made it very easy for Halifax and Bank of Scotland, those brands that I looked after, to go straight into the aggregator markets and to get really prime placement. And because of the configurability of those APIs, we could flex pricing, coverages, policies, all sorts of levels. Because what we learned very early on, is if you can put a product out there that's available and a recognised brand, and you can get in the top end results, 3 was the magic number in the UK, you were able to grow your sales in a material way. So when I took over Halifax and Bank of Scotland, we're doing about 600 policies a week. That then became 4,400 after we adapted this approach within the aggregator market. We wound up being 62% of the UK market. So there are material opportunities if you can do this well, and if you can make your data available in a meaningful way that can be consumed.
Awesome, thank you. Caroline, we've heard a little bit about the value prop that's there in some of these products for consumers and what value may be there for businesses as well. But obviously with all this data that is being shared, it increases the exposure or the surface area for attack. And so we obviously need to consider how this is done securely, and we need to consider privacy as this occurs. Would you like to maybe talk about how we should be thinking about privacy with this increase in data portability?
Absolutely. So, all of these apps work by access to the data, as we said. So a lot of it, though, has to be driven by the consumer. What are they happy to share? When are they happy to share it? One of the biggest considerations for designing these is how do we put that in the hand of the user in a way that's meaningful? If they integrate their bank account with 10 different apps, how do they remember what they've integrated? How do they remember what permissions? And how do they manage that without it becoming, some sort of Facebook-like preference center where nobody can make any choice on anything because they can't understand the nuances of it? So that's really key to it. And as you said, security is really important. In order to get consumers to use these sort of apps, we need to build customer trust. So if it's not secure, if we have large data breaches, etc., that is going to really erode the trust. The other consideration for New Zealand is, at what point does the data become another organisation's responsibility? Is it when it leaves the bank's firewall at the edge? Or is it when it's received at the other side, maybe Blink Pay? Because in New Zealand, we've got notifiable breach requirements now for serious harm, and likelihood is you lose your financial information, serious harm most likely will occur. So who's responsible for those notifications, for example, becomes a really big question. The other one that's challenging in open banking is what I would call the complex accounts. Joint accounts as the prime one. Who decides on a joint account who can have access to the data? You imagine a husband and wife team. One turns it on, one turns it off. Next one turns it back on again. It goes round and round all day. So how do we cater and design for those sort of things and give visibility to the other account holder of what has been going on? So they're all design challenges. None of them can't be overcome, but they all need to be designed in up front when we start and think about these solutions.
Great, thank you. And I've just noted down a couple of hot topics that we can get into later on. So, Jannat, you mentioned the report that you were instrumental in producing, which was titled Open Finance and Digital Equity, A Path to Fair Finance and a More Inclusive New Zealand. We do have in New Zealand some incoming legislation called the Consumer Data Right. So we do have MB working on policy that will affect the space. When you were doing this work on the report and all the conversations you've had before and after, what should we be thinking about from a policy perspective as we go through this process?
I wouldn't say instrumental. All I did was just herd the cats. But yeah, from a policy perspective, going back to the report itself, we made it very much, I know, Adrian, you've got experience in the UK, and then we've got Australia over there, and there's the rest of the world as well. And when we did, IDC did the research, the first bit of research on this, which was a literature review, And it very quickly became apparent that no one was doing it from a financial inclusion or well-being perspective. And so we really took that angle and took it as an opportunity, like there are in many spaces. I work in IoT, smart cities and AI, and there's an opportunity for New Zealand that's just looking us in the face that we're ignoring. But in this case, we were in a position and supported to actually take a financial inclusion and well-being lens. And that's what really came out then of all the rest of the work that happened in terms of doing a survey across industry, a sample, really, because it was just the start of a bigger conversation and a longer journey for the country, and then workshops in person and online with people, because it was still very much a COVID pandemic situation. But it was very, very apparent that it needed to be about the well-being of New Zealanders. And so that policy needed to align with that and not be about what was happening in other parts of the world, and actually really make it about this country and the opportunity that we had here. And very much so in relation to that, it was about the fact that 97% of the businesses in this country are small, and actually they were New Zealanders, and that we needed to not necessarily put aside big corporates, but we needed to think about SMEs, and so the policies needed to really resonate with that audience as well. And that we needed to balance, probably the third thing I'll say just quickly on that one, is that we needed to balance policies and legislation with the ability to truly innovate, which is the opportunity for this country that, again, we're not doing. So we're not really making it about what the opportunity is, and really getting in there and reaching into the pockets of this country that have great ideas and great skill sets, or building that capacity so they can be at the table and we can truly innovate and take this opportunity. And on the data one, open data, and the insurance question, or the idea about insurance, is that we need to align. So we need two things that need to align is the Aotearoa digital strategy, which was launched on Wednesday by Minister Clark. So trust, inclusion and growth. And the other one that needs to align is open data in general, so not just open finance. So I'm talking about insurance assessments being based on IoT data and sensor data from around the country, so you can know what's going to happen in terms of climate impact, and ensure, and then small businesses can do it based on really what they're doing today, tomorrow and the next, rather than what it looks like they're doing. And it can be really pulling that data together and giving you an honest view and a transparent view, and policy needs to support that.
Great. So with consumer data right, the government has indicated that the primary legislation will be enacted next year, and then we expect that sectors will be designated and there will be detailed rules written for those sectors, and then there'll be compliance timeframes. So there is quite a lot of water to go under the bridge. We don't have much detail yet, but to follow up on your comment, Jannat, around businesses making up a really important segment of consumers in New Zealand, pleasingly the government has indicated that businesses are consumers and will be included in the regime. Are there any other lessons that we should be taking from other countries that have been through regulation already, like the UK and Australia, and that we should make sure that as this policy develops in New Zealand, we don't go down the wrong path? I'll throw that open to anyone.
I'll have a go. Yeah, okay, so a couple of things out of Australia, and it's interesting that that the government here is so certain that small businesses are consumers here. What we found in Australia, of course, is that small businesses already use open data type concepts. They use it every single day. It's a very rare small business that uses a Xero that doesn't have a bank feed in both of our countries. So government needs to recognise that it's not a green field, that they're not building something from scratch, that businesses are doing these things every day, all day, quite safely, quite securely, quite happily, and that replacing that with a fresh set of rules that is risky, and they should take care. So in Australia, the accounting software platforms are not using open data, or open banking data. We all have our bilateral arrangements because there are a number of elements of the regime that don't work for our type of business. Key one would be inadvertently being captured by open banking. I said before, we share accounting data. That's accounting data, not banking data out of the back end. But the way some of the rules work, we are captured. And so our 1,000-app ecosystem would need to meet the same standards as we would need to meet to access that information. So inadvertent capturing of different industries is an issue to watch out for. But yeah, so I think the key thing is really around businesses are different, and businesses need to be treated differently. I might leave it there because I could go on. I could go on later after this if anyone wants to know.
If I can just chip in on that. So in the UK experience, the banks got quite preoccupied with consent because obviously you're going to be sharing your banking transaction data, right? So they wanted to make sure that the consent was bulletproof from the consumer and the consumer side. And what that then led to was this maddening and dementing position of, well, we want customers to reconsent every 90 days to see their bank account information. Now, that in and of itself doesn't seem so bad. But when you don't have any kind of initiation activity, all you can do is view. Like, okay, cool, I've got my app that I love, I've got all my accounts in one place, what can I do? I can't do anything. So, and then I get harassed by a modal overlay saying, hey, you need to reconsent, you need to make sure all your consents are up to date. And so I was part of the 48% of folks, at least when I was at Barclays, who didn't bother to reconsent. I was like, I don't see the point. There's no value here for me. One of the really interesting things about the New Zealand regime is we've started with both view and write access via payment initiation and account information APIs. So I think by taking a leaf that Samantha from the FMA said around learning from the mistakes of others, I think we've actually caught up quite a lot with kind of by way of our approach. And I think from another real key thing from a governance regulatory perspective, when I want to flip the other side and invert this, the UK had a really strong regime of non-compliance. If you didn't live up to your responsibilities, oh boy, they held your feet to the fire. And if anyone's actually stood up in front of the FCA and tried to defend a position where the answer is always no, doesn't matter what you say, then you'll have some bearing. Whereas in New Zealand, we don't have the same level of regulatory rigour, at least in this space. And so I keep on campaigning for more empowerment rights to Payments New Zealand to be able to impose a little bit more rigour on people meeting their commitments.
Cool.
And I think from my perspective, making sure those rules are flexible enough. New Zealand's very innovative as a market, so making sure those rules don't go stale for us, making sure that we can actually still have that innovative product development, meet the market, etc., but in a safe way is really important. And I think giving some of the larger institutes time to come up with it, you know, it's only going through next year, making sure we've got enough lead time before we're holding people account to a new set of regimes. You know, some of those large banks, it's going to be multi-year programs of work to get them there. Whereas some of the startups, they're nimble, they're quick, excellent, they can do it very quickly. So we are, for a long period of time, going to have a sort of divided ecosystem with people who've made the new line, whatever it is, and those who haven't. I think the other piece that goes in about that consent is also the work that's going on with the Department of Internal Affairs about their digital trust framework as well, because that has rules about consent. So how those two pieces go together is going to be really important.
Great. Absolutely.
I was going to say it's interesting because just on that one about the fragmented, the thing that was really obvious from that report was that there's a chunk of the population that would be absolutely fine with all of this innovation and open finance and happy to use all the apps and are actually sitting there waiting for all these apps, but there's a large chunk of the population that aren't ready, and we need to design for everybody. And so, but a couple of the other interesting things was that there definitely are gaps, and so people are unbanked or underbanked, whatever the terminology is, and they're not able to get loans from, you know, places that people would normally go and get loans. And then there's obviously other things about comparing. Adrian talked about comparing and trying to get the better deal, but what they wanted to do was actually have these apps also give them a bit of internal capability to understand finance and financial, you know, understand their numbers, not just do things for them. But they still wanted the banks and government involved. So there was very much well, where's the liability sit? I think I'd feel safer if there was a bank or a big bank or a government, you know, organisation somewhere in there in a pretty heavyweight space, because then I would be able to trust it. And then the other thing was, you know, going back to those other 2 points is, you know, where are the gaps and where should we really be focusing the innovation is there's the chunk of the population that are happy to sit in front of Netflix and just be fed content, you know, but how do you know that's not paid, you know, which it is, you know, the shows that show up are paid to be there, and how do you know the legit comparison is actually really what's out there in the market? So being able to understand the AI that sits behind it, and so really wanting to co-create the interfaces, but also co-create the logic behind the scenes and building that talent from the grassroots up in this country so that we actually understand the ethics behind all of that. So there were some really interesting insights insights, and I think that public policy then needs to align with those conversations, and that's where the Aotearoa digital strategy sits alongside something like this in the trust framework, because we need to get it right, and it needs to be right for everybody. And yes, there are opportunities to solve problems for people, and a number of them are highlighted in the report, probably ones that many people in this room haven't even thought of as a problem at all, because we're not in the same situation as a lot of New Zealanders. But there is still the potential for exploitation, and some people also don't want to be digitally included. You know, they're absolutely happy to sit on the outskirts. So how do you enable that? How do you enable that from a well-being perspective? Because that, for some people, is financial well-being. And I can tell you, I have no phone at the moment and no data. And I tell you, like, the last 3 days have been great. So mentally, I am so much better. But many people are on that. And so it's how do you, and that's what I like about the approach that the government's taking around alignment, because there's the Digital Technology Industry Transformation Plan, there's the AI strategy, there's the Aotearoa digital strategy, there's all these other frameworks, and actually it's been put in practice on a priority basis to say, first it's the people of this country, then after that it's the tech and data design for the people of this country. And I think the innovation that is happening in the pockets of this country needs to be showcased more, because there are some really cool things happening where they are thinking about privacy, and you are thinking about data sovereignty, and we are thinking about all the other different pockets of data that's available, and trying to get people to understand the potential of bringing data together, but in a way that actually makes sure that we legitimately and genuinely are innovating for good, rather than just innovating to make money. And if I hear another startup that just wants to go overseas and sell to the rest of the world, I'd just say, turn around and look at your country, because we need you here, but what do you need so we can support you to do that?
So just to close off this discussion around the policy and how it's evolving in New Zealand, what I'm hearing from the panel was, look, there is all this open financy stuff that's happening at the moment and is being used. There is this regulatory regime that is coming in, and let's say 3+ years away before it is implemented on the ground and usable. And the message I'm hearing is, let's make sure we don't inadvertently cause all the stuff that's happening to be negatively affected. Does that sound about right? And we need to be careful about decisions we make. Cool. Adrian.
If I could just riff on that. So for me, one of the key points of tension is you've got all of these things happening, but for me, the harmonisation and the choreography between them is kind of critical, right? Because I've been involved in the past year working with Payments New Zealand on the Open Banking API framework for New Zealand, and I would hate to get to CDR and they just throw all that out the window and say, right, we're going to do this entirely different thing over here. And so for me, the alignment between digital identity, digital Aotearoa strategy, consumer data, how does that all work together? Because what we can't have is a situation where they all go into the wild and separately, and it's like Ghostbusters crossing of the streams, and nothing really works. So for me, that is a big, I think, a key consideration at a regulatory level. How does this all work together? So.
Yep. Danielle?
Yeah, look, I totally agree. New Zealand's in a really good position because it's got an industry that talks to each other. It's got an opportunity to learn from other jurisdictions and at a detailed level. So certainly in Australia, for example, the husband and wife who shares the data, who changes their mind. The banks had to build that twice because they changed their mind. So, you don't want that. I mean, banks have got a lot to do, and you want to have the planning right up at the start. So New Zealand's well positioned to, in this instance, not being first in the government regime is actually been very beneficial. There's lots of lessons, and there's good connections already internally.
Cool. Let's move on from policy and talk about consumers. So we're calling it Consumer Data Right, the legislation in New Zealand, and it is designed to give consumers rights in relation to their data. So let's look at it from that perspective. So for the panel, for everyone, what is a consumer outcome that you would love to see from open finance within the next 2 or 3 years? What do we want to see in New Zealand that will give that positive impact to consumers?
I think maybe I'll start. I think for me the key thing for consumers is trust and confidence in how their data is handled. So giving people that granularity of making their own informed choices. And the key word there, I think, for me is informed. Knowing what's going to happen, knowing how it's going to impact them, whether they opt yes or no, what is the ramifications of my decision in a language that I understand. So that's not special legalese, that's plain language that I, as a normal consumer in New Zealand, can understand what's happening. I think to me that's going to be absolutely key to any of the success of what we're proposing.
If I can just chip in there. So from my perspective, I think what I would love to see is an abundance of new products and services that genuinely seek to help everyday Kiwis. One of the points I didn't make when I was talking about Plum, and Jannat, thank you for prompting my memory, one of the things they do is, because of the algorithms they run against all the transactional data that comes into their platform, they figure out all the offers from the various providers in that market, and they say to you with a little bit of behavioural nudging, a little prompt, hey, by the way, actually, Danielle, did you know if you switch to this energy supply over here, you could save $50 a month? And then they ask you a real simple question, would you like to do that? And it's a yes or no binary thing. And if you say yes, then they automatically switch in the background. It's that kind of capability that Open Finance enables, the ability to help people be better off. And I think in this day and age, with the rising crisis in the cost of living, helping people be a little bit better off is a pretty good and decent and noble goal.
Can we talk a bit about payments since we're talking about consumers? So Adrian, you obviously have a fintech that works on payments. What are the opportunities in New Zealand? What are the problems that need to be solved?
Oh, wow. Okay, I'll try and keep it brief, which is not one of my specialisms. Payment problems in New Zealand. One of the first things I was shocked and dismayed by, sorry if I'm doing payments, there's no instant payments. Like in 2008, Britain built the faster payments infrastructure, which I built on behalf of Lloyds Banking Group. I was part of that effort, which means that you could send payments from account to account in 200 milliseconds. What does that mean in practice? It means no intraday transaction settlements. There's no SBI. There's no waiting for a transaction to hit your account in the right order to determine your level of cash flow so you can carry on building and managing your business. That's problem number one right there. And then there's so many other things from a payments perspective. Like, for instance, direct debits. A technology from the 60s, still core and fundamental to so many businesses. And what many businesses fail to appreciate, but consumers do, is if I don't have the available funds, I'll get a dishonoured payment. I'll be slammed with charges, fees, maybe unauthorised overdraft. Wow, really? And then I think of other payments technology that's been invented in the 60s that still drives the country. Look at the state of merchant service fees. Look at the state of regulation that's been brought in to try and compress that a little bit. I think we may have missed the mark, but we've tried. There's a lot of things that can be done from a payments perspective. But I think, for me, above all else, you want to have that trust that that thing you've paid, it's paid. It doesn't disappear into a black hole for 3, 4, 5 days. It settles instantly. And you know that the available balance in your account, that's your safe to spend money. It's not going to suddenly disappear because a whole bunch of transactions that happen on the weekend then go out Monday afternoon. So there is a lot of space to improve the payment space. But the really cool thing, though, and I'm really buoyed by this, there are a lot of folks doing some really cool stuff. And so, you know, at an industry level, I'm really looking forward, I don't know about you, Josh, but I'm looking forward to enduring consent when the banks get that built. The ability to do digital subscription type payments. In the UK, they call it variable recurring payments. The ability to set those up in seconds as opposed to the typical 10-day period for setting up a direct debit. There's a lot of cool stuff.
Awesome. So we're going to move to Q&A soon, so please get questions in if you have any, and we'll read them off the iPad. But I wanted to ask the panel for any hot topics that you think we should address. So this is getting to that objective we had around what's happening in the vanguard of open finance in New Zealand. And Caroline, earlier you mentioned issues with how we deal with joint accounts, and you also raised this thorny question of how should liability be allocated for all the stakeholders in a system like this. Feel free to pick those or something else, but do you want to maybe kick us off on a hot topic that you've got a view on?
Yeah, so I think particularly joint accounts, or what I call complex accounts. So things like, how do we deal with that person who's got power of attorney on an account? Can the person with the power of attorney make changes? What visibility do other people have of those accounts? And I think for us, one of the key things will be making sure for consumers that we don't all address that problem differently, because that's going to cause confusion in the consumer market. You know, it worked on one app with one bank this way, it worked differently in another. We're going to end up with a lot of confused public. So making sure we actually work together as a collaboration and come across some of those larger items. And absolutely, you know, we talk about the UK. That joint account thing has been done multiple times by some of the banks there because they still can't quite get it quite right. And I think New Zealand's going to have a challenge there because we have quite a diverse population and we have some different belief structures in New Zealand that will add to that complexity. So particularly things around Maori, etc., and place for iwi and access for iwi, etc., is going to change what we need to design for New Zealand versus what the rest of the world has designed. So we do need to make sure we don't absolutely learn the lessons from overseas, but we don't replicate it all and just assume as if by magic it's going to work in New Zealand. So I think that's going to be one of the biggest challenges. Individual user accounts should be reasonably straightforward. Unfortunately, actually a large number of New Zealand account holders, that is not them in the banking space. So also, what do we do with minors? When is someone a minor? What does a minor have? You know, some 16-year-olds are well able to make their own life choices. Others, they still need their mother. So how do we cater and design for that? Is going to be another challenge for us.
If I can just riff on the joint accounts or multi-authority accounts. So we've been confronting this at an industry level as part of the Payments New Zealand Business Working Group that you've recently joined, Josh. And what we thought would make sense is if we could apply an equivalency principle where whatever's available in the bank today, we would then just recognise and reflect that, because we didn't want to go through that same issue of getting banks to create it twice. The trouble with that is, when there isn't a common framework as to how to manage that and deal with that, then you're still in that same situation of it's being handled slightly differently by different folks. So I just want to, that's point number one. Point number two, since I'm a Māori boy, I feel like I have to riff on the Māori stuff. We do have a very different worldview. Like when I first came back to New Zealand and I was talking to some folks who are doing the digital identity, and they were talking around building databases on marae for hapu and iwi. And I sort of said, oh, why are we doing that? He's like, oh, because there's no databases in New Zealand. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, well, one of the core providers is Amazon, which is Sydney-based. Thankfully, there's been a recent change to databases come into New Zealand, but from a Māori perspective, the idea of your identity or data about you, which is part of who you are, being somewhere off the whenua, what the hell? So I must admit, I struggled to wrap my mind around it, that whole idea. And then when I heard that the disaster recovery from the Sydney instance is then over to America, I'm like, whoa, okay, we need to review this whole cloud-based situation we're going on here. And so there are very specific sort of iwi and ethnic-based considerations that I'm not sure everyone's fully aware of. That for us Māori, that should be obvious, but for non-Māori, it's not.
Great. You got one, Danielle?
Yeah, I've got two, I think. So one of the concepts in open banking, which is an interesting one, is this concept of derived data, which I kind of alluded to before, where if you take in some open banking and then you transform it in some way, and then, in our instance, we think it becomes something different, whether that gets captured or not. So definitions around that are really important, and the UK and Australia have got quite a different approach on that. And to Adrian's previous point about consenting, it's not too good in the UK to have to reconsent every 90 days or now reaffirm. In Australia, under open banking, you only have to do that annually. But because of derived data and the rules around data deletion, if you don't reconsent and your accounting data is captured, then we have to delete your accounts. So I don't know if anyone's got a small business, but I'm sure you wouldn't want your accounts to be deleted because you didn't respond to the emails to reconfirm your banking data. So that's a kind of unintended consequence that needs to be considered. The other thing that I would say is, I think I've forgotten it, so maybe I'll say it later.
You've done two though, but that was great.
Oh, was that two? That was only 1.5.
But on that,
One and a bit.
Well, can I riff on the derived data bit? Because one of our major banking customers, they've basically said to me, look, we would love to have the derived data in. So when we've got our customers sitting with their financial advisors, and their financial advisors then transform the transactional data into really meaningful goals and objectives for how I can increase my personal wealth, then they come in to see us and say, hey, so we'd like to do this. And we look at them blankly like, what you on about, bro? We don't know what you're on about. And so one of our banking partners says, bro, what can we do about getting data in? And so that's one of the problem statements that we're working on at the moment, of how do we get that derived and worked on transformed data in, so then when that customer is talking to their financial advisors, whether it be accountants, whether it be investment advisors or their banks, there's a single unified data set which can then, everyone has a joined up story. And as a consumer and a customer, you can then make better informed decisions and go in with your eyes wide open. So I think that's maybe a key area that we can talk about enough.
Can I have two now, or did he take my spot?
you get a chance.
Two quick things. One is, it was an example before, because I'm pretty sure these guys have developed some sort of instant payment thing.
Totally.
Yeah. So one of the problems in New Zealand is, as much as everyone says we talk to each other and collaborate, actually we don't. So there's lots of stuff happening in this country. So have a look around, talk to the right people, because you'll find actually there is things happening. So don't reinvent wheels. But the other one is really around the opportunity to going back to Adrian's point around innovating for this country. But how would we do that? And that's, the Kiwi FinTech Accelerator died. That was like 3 years ago, 4 years ago. And I'm not saying that's the best model, but we need innovation incubated in the spaces where people are, where they can walk in off the street pretty much and just be able to co-create some solution and tell you about what their pain points are. Or unless everyone can get around the country on a regular basis and talk to people and be there and then think about what it is what are those problem statements, because again, the people in this room aren't the ones that are really going to be truly benefiting from something like open finance. And it's only until we're there in those spaces with those people and everyone else that's then around them in their support environments and in their ecosystems that we can truly get the thinking right. So we can truly collaborate. An example is just the disabled community. Like how do you make and one of the organisations that I used to do some work for, it's about people having the same lives, just ordinary lives. They just want ordinary lives, and so they want to be able to go to the bank and use their money as they wish, but they need the support worker to go with them. So how do we really legitimately give people an opportunity to be fight for that financial well-being and whatever that means to them. And then the third one would just be, we're talking about data, we keep talking about data, but data literacy is a huge problem in this country. And so we need to get that right.
Thank you.
There were 3 hot topics. Sorry, 3.
That's fine. Thank you. So now we've got about 8 minutes for Q&A, so let's work through it. One of them sounds like it's directed at you, Adrian. So love the vision on where open fintech, insurance tech can go. What have been the biggest regulatory hurdles? Or maybe if we broaden that, what have been the hurdles to doing these kinds of use cases that you were talking about earlier?
Oh, okay. The biggest hurdles, so taking a very parochial Blink Pay perspective, so we're trying to build our software as a service platform on open banking APIs, the inability to access production-ready APIs. So for those who are unfamiliar, not from the banking industry, the account information API is one of the 2 go-to-market APIs that have been specified by Payments New Zealand industry. And the account information API, it has 11 different data points that you can select from. Name, obvious, okay, cool. So the KYC type information. You've got, list of accounts, cool. Balances, cool. Transaction list, cool. Standing orders, cool. Additional card holders, cool. Joint parties to the account. There is so much rich information that can be used to create new products and services. Now, I don't want to steal the thunder of Akahu, but there's a lot of stuff that Akahu are doing in that space whereby they're taking that information that's available from banking feeds and creating new products. And so at the risk of talking about folks in your portfolio, there are some folks who use that to then do identity verification based on your banking relationship. There are some folks who are using it to income verification. Some of them are doing assessments of affordability. And this is all available right there if you've got a little bit of nous and access. And so for me, that's one of the biggest stumbling blocks is getting access to that data. So that's kind of the first part is getting access. As an enabler of that, you have to have individual contractual relationships with a data provider, which is not an easy thing to do. And I'm not going to talk about our personal experience because it's damning, but what I will say, there was a letter to MB last year from, Worldline, and they expressed their dismay at taking 7 years to sign 3 banking agreements. So anyone who's in that game, God bless you, we're with you, we love you.
Awesome. This is probably a quick question. To what extent should entities that are receiving data or getting the access in order to initiate a payment be licensed or regulated?
I think there has to be some regulation of them because it needs to build that trust framework up. So whether it's a license or whether it is a code of conduct, I think it has yet to be seen. But I think there absolutely has to be something to give the consumers confidence in this space. Yeah.
If I can just riff on that. So because you enter into individual agreements, bilateral agreements with the banks, so what happens is you then become subject to all of the protections that they have there. And so you go through their various, their contractual agreements. One of our banking partners, we were their first BS11 sort of test case, and so we were being brought on in a partnering type role. So we had to go through all of those internal hoops and hurdles, which is a very interesting exercise. The other thing that we've had to do is not only to sign up to use the APIs in New Zealand, have to sign up to the Payments New Zealand API Centre and sign up to all their terms and conditions and meet all of those. But what we've also done is we've also got accreditation for ISO 27001, which is the international gold standard around data and information management, which has brought in about 114 different policies that we have to live and breathe. And so we're trying to make sure that we've gone, to use a British phrase, belt and brace for anything that looks around commercial relationships, because we want to make sure that as a third party connecting to banking services, we don't want to leave the banks exposed, because that's just bad for business. Because the banks can just shut up shop and say, look, mate, we don't deal with you anymore, you guys are problematic. And we can't afford that, because we're trying to build a business around that.
And I think following on from that, part of it under the Privacy Act, there are changes proposed that the Ministry of Justice are asking for consultation on at the moment about if you receive information from another source, how are you going to give notice, etc. Now that's really going to impact potentially on some of these things we're talking about, because they are getting that data from the third party. So how do we make sure whoever we're engaging with has got that under control, and they're not going to bring what I would call the originating organisation into disrepute reputationally through their lack of compliance in that space.
Adrian, you brought up identity verification and the ability to connect data from other sources for that purpose. We've got a question here saying, could open data streamline the ability to establish a single AML setup for individuals or other entities to apply with all the institutions that they sign up to? I know you mentioned the trust framework earlier, Caroline. Is there anything that you want to say on this?
I think the idea of the trust framework is exactly that. There is definitely work in this space ongoing in government at the moment, and I think it is watch this space, but absolutely, I agree. You know, the amount of stuff to sign up for things for KYM is huge, and it is a barrier, and it, depending on the services that we're talking about, some of these other organisations where you want to connect your data are going to also have to KYM you for a second time. So nobody wants to have that in their life. So I think absolutely there's an opportunity there, and I think it's an opportunity government are shortly going to hopefully fill.
I think the key challenge though is, can it be done? Absolutely. Is it likely? Hard to say, because the moment you get everyone in the room trying to design one solution that fits all, it's like that old designer statement, right? If you try and get a room full of designers to design a better horse, you'll get a camel. And so you have something that kind of meets everyone's needs without meeting anyone's needs. So that is the challenge and the trade-off. And I understand, I don't know, Danielle, if you can speak to this, I heard that was one of the challenges that have been faced in the Australian market.
Well, in Australia, we were asked what data we want access to, and surprisingly enough, everybody wants access to government data. So, but that's not a sector that's been selected as yet. So, you know, having access to the government's own data will really make this stuff a lot easier. And in some instances, it happens, but there's no plans for them to enable the APIs that we would really need to do that.
So we're going to have to wrap up, but I want to finish by asking everyone on the panel, what is the favourite open finance related product that you've used recently?
Oh, Xero, but I'm biased. But, you know, all joking aside, the ability to ingest account information and then do that reconciliation reduces so much drag from an organisation. So obviously we have a bit of a crush on Xero, which is why we think so fondly of them.
Awesome. Anyone else?
Look, I spoke quite a bit before about COGO. It means, you know, anything to do with the climate means a lot to me. You asked me a question, what, you know, ingests data from Xero, but there is a New Zealand app that we quite like, and I took a bit of a poll of my New Zealand-based colleagues, which is called Pocketsmith, which is actually out here in the tech alley, and they do an aggregation of, you know, personal financial management already, which has a lot of purposes and it has a lot of uses. In Australia, I'm seeing a trend where banks are actually asking their customers to use an app like that to aggregate everything to make their lending decisions easier without the bank themselves having to do it. So, I think those kinds of apps are quite useful on the personal side.
Yeah, from my perspective, I think seeing out on the tech alley there, Credit Sense goes to me, mainly because it's a New Zealand success story, and I think that's something we really need to, celebrate. Is that it's New Zealanders building for New Zealanders, and actually for them, dealing with a customer market, where financial hardship is a real thing. So actually making it available, making it useful for customers, and therefore making a difference for New Zealanders.
Awesome.
And I stay away from all that sort of stuff. But I've got a mate who created with students and family Tenure.ai, which actually integrates with Xero, is one of your apps on the App Store, and basically you talk to it and it gives you insights about your business accounts and your banking and gives you hints on what to do and how to better manage your money, and you just talk to it, and that actually is freedom for a lot of, you can be just sitting in a car driving along and you just say, can you just let me know when my payment's due, or can you tell me when I made the last, just talking to something and actually being able to have a conversation with essentially your bank. But and on that note, I will also say that it's important that if we're going to use true AI or even data itself, you've got to remove the bias and you've got to make sure that you're doing it in an ethical way. But that one is cool. So Tenure.ai, and it's Donna Marie Ryder, who's based in Hamilton, and they did it with some students from the university and Wintech, and pulled it all together and pitched it to Xero, and they're on the App Store. So take a look. And this one as well. This one was cool too.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So a few last things from me. First up, the next session in here is looking at how fintech can help with ESG matters. So stay in here if you want to come along to that one. The second thing is that if you are keen to see more of these open finance enabled products in action, there have been a number already mentioned up here. You would have seen Sugar Wallet on the stage just before lunchtime. There are a couple of others that pitched here in the breakfast session. PocketSmith has been mentioned, that's out in Tech Alley, and CrediSense. There is Dollar and there is CloudCheck that are all doing things with connected accounts. So there are a lot of options to check out this stuff in action. And the final thing from me is to say thank you for all our speakers. I know you're all incredibly busy. Danielle, you even came from Australia. So thank you so much, and thank you guys for coming along.
Thank you, Josh.